Okay, so like what makes something, actually good? Is it like built into reality itself, some kind of inherent property? Or is it something that comes from, I don't know, us? Like how we react to the world, as valuing creatures.
Yeah, yeah,
So, in this deep dive, you and I, we're both kind of philosophy nerds, right?
okay,
We're going to tackle this really cool area called fitting attitude theories of value.
right.
And this isn't just like some heady abstract thing. This gets right down to like the core of how we understand what we think is awesome, what we find really enjoyable, and what we just consider like straight up good.
It really is. As our listener, you've probably encountered a bunch of different theories about value,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's a big topic, but today we're going to dig into this perspective that says the key to understanding value isn't just about the thing itself. It's not just about our subjective feelings, but it's about this like normative dimension, right? It's
Yeah.
about how we should respond.
Totally. So, our mission today is pretty clear. We want to get a good handle on the core ideas of these fitting attitude theories. And we're going to call them FA theories for short, just for ease.
Right. Makes sense.
We want to see what makes them so strong, as an approach to understanding value. But we also got to grapple with the, big philosophical challenges they face. And our guide for this whole thing is the good old Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy entry on the topic. The CEFAP, it's a real treasure trove of deep and thorough analysis, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It lays it all out really well. And I think one of the main insights from FA theories, as we see in the essay, is that they're trying to explain like evaluative facts. So things like what makes something good or admirable. And they do this by looking at normative facts about human responses,
Right.
like what's fitting to desire or admire.
Right.
And the most basic example kind of sums it up. Someone is admirable because it's fitting to admire them. That's the core idea.
Yeah, and it feels, I don't know, kind of self-evident, Like it's
Yeah.
almost like saying that being lovable is just another way of saying it's fitting to love. Or that being blameworthy just kind of means it's fitting to blame.
Yeah, it does have that sort of almost like a tautological feel to it.
Right.
But that's a starting point for FA theories.
Yeah.
It's intentional. These equivalences, like lovable if and only if it's fitting to love, or blameworthy if and only if it's fitting to blame, they resonate with us because the evaluative terms, like lovable or blameworthy, they seem so closely tied to certain kinds of responses we have as humans. And importantly, this link feels normative, right? It's about what ought to be, not just what happens to be the case.
So normative, like it's not just describing who is loved, but who deserves to be loved. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the theory gets its philosophical teeth.
Yeah.
FA theories, they go beyond just stating these equivalences. They argue that the evaluative fact, like the fact of being lovable, going back to that example, is actually grounded in the normative fact about the fitting response.
Huh.
The fact that it's fitting to love that person. So being lovable obtains because it is fitting to love. The explanation goes from the fittingness to the value.
Ah, I see. So it's not like two sides of the same coin. The fittingness of the response is like the real deal. And the value property is kind of riding on that, dependent on it.
Exactly. That's exactly the ambition of a lot of FA theorists. And this explanatory project, it goes beyond these specific evaluative properties.
Oh, okay.
Some FA theorists even want to explain generic value, being just simply good or valuable, period, in terms of being fit to desire or being fit to value.
Mm.
And as the CEPI carefully points out, valuing here, we're thinking of it broadly, it covers all sorts of positive attitudes, like being glad about something, respecting it, taking pleasure in it, wanting to protect it. It's a wide range.
Okay, I see. So FA theory is aiming to really get at that fundamental understanding of value by like rooting it in these fitting responses. So how does this framework position itself relative to other big philosophical accounts of value, like the ones I'm sure our listener, being a philosophy person, is probably familiar with?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to know where you stand, right?
Right.
And the SFP does a good job of positioning FA theory as this middle ground in the world of value theory.
Okay.
On one side, we've got primitivism,
Mm-hmm.
which basically says that fundamental value, like goodness itself, it's just unexplainable.
Right.
It's just a basic fact, end of story. And then on the other side, we have subjectivism, which tries to explain value entirely in terms of non-normative facts about human responses, like what people just happen to like or want.
So primitivism just kind of shrugs and says, value, it just is. And subjectivism says, it's all about our feelings, man.
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
And FA theory is trying to find a path between these two extremes. It wants to as the Esky puts it, demystify value by offering explanations. But the key here is that these explanations are framed in terms of normative facts about our responses.
Yeah.
So it's not just what we do, feel, or do, but what it's fitting or right to feel or do. There's a difference.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. It's like it's saying there's something objective or at least intersubjective about value.
Yeah.
It's not just like whatever floats your boat,
Yeah.
but it still ties it to, us, our capacity as beings who respond to the world.
Exactly. And the SCP also points out this unifying potential within FA theories.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that lots of different forms of value, like being admirable, being good, being delightful, they might all be understood through this lens of fitting responses. And the differences in these types of value would just come from the different types of responses that are seen as appropriate.
Okay, so, we've laid the groundwork. We kind of get what FA theories are all about. But it sounds like there are some key decisions, some choice points that theorists run into when they're building their specific version of this FA framework.
Right, yeah. And the ESET calls them choice points. What are some of those big crossroads?
Yeah, what are those?
Well, there are definitely a few important ones. And the first one that the ESET talked about is this distinction between metaphysical, conceptual, and semantic accounts. Early FA theorists, they were always super clear about whether they wanted to explain the very essence of evaluative properties, what it is to be good, or the content of our evaluative concepts, what we actually mean by goodness, or even the meaning of evaluative terms, what does the word good really signify? You see the difference.
Yeah.
So where's the emphasis now? Where's the focus?
Yeah, where does the emphasis lie now?
Well, Paus, as the essay points out, these days most FA theorists work within a metaphysical framework. So their main goal is to explain the evaluative properties themselves, what is it for something to be good or admirable? And they do that by grounding these properties in normative facts about human responses. Think of it this way. A metaphysical account asks, what is value in reality? A conceptual account looks at what we mean when we use words like good. And a semantic account examines the truth conditions of statements that use those words.
Okay, so it's more about the fundamental reality of value. It's not just about how we happen to think about it or talk about it.
Exactly. But here's a little wrinkle that points out something interesting. If an FA theory can show that there's a necessary connection between an evaluative property and a normative property of a response, so for example, if admirable is necessarily equivalent to fitting to admire, then it's very likely that there are also conceptual and semantic necessities at play.
Okay.
So it might be true, just because of the meaning of the words we use or the very nature of the concepts involved, that these equivalences just have to hold.
Okay, so that's one choice point. It seems like another key one has to do with which specific normative property these theories latch onto.
Right.
We've been using fittingness as our main example, but the SAPI shows that there are others.
Yeah, definitely. Fittingness. The idea that a response is deserved, that it's worthy of its object, that's central to a lot of FA theories. Some even say that fittingness is the most basic normative concept, the one that underlies all the others. But FA theorists aren't limited to just that one. The SEP lists a whole bunch. Ought, correct, justified, rational, required, warranted, and lately reason has been getting a lot of attention.
So instead of saying something is good because it's fitting to desire it, they might say it's good because there are reasons to desire it or because you ought to desire it.
Exactly. And which normative property you pick can really change how the theory deals with some of the trickier issues we'll talk about later.
Okay.
Right now, according to the SEP, it seems like fittingness and reasons are the two frontrunners.
Okay. The next choice point, according to the SEP, is about for whom the response has to be fitting. Is it something everyone should feel, or can it be relative to a specific person or group?
Right. This is where we get into the classic agent-neutral versus agent-relative distinction with evaluative properties. If it's agent-neutral, like awesomeness in the SEP's example, then the fitting response, which would be awe, seems like it's something anyone should feel, or, any relevant agent.
Right.
But if the property is agent-relative, like, say, shamefulness, then the fitting response, shame in this case, is directed at the person who did the shameful thing, or maybe those close to them.
Right, it makes sense. I should feel shame for my own screw-ups, not for some random person on the street.
Exactly. And this distinction, it has a big impact on how FA theories explain these different types of properties. For agent-neutral properties, the fitting response might have to be universal in a way. But for agent-relative ones, it's more localized.
Got it. And then there's this difference between objective and perspectival normative properties. What does that mean in the context of FA theory?
So an objective normative property is one where it just is based on all the relevant facts, even if nobody knows those facts.
Hmm.
Like if someone is actually blameworthy, that might depend on a whole bunch of complicated things, and some of those things might be totally unknown.
Right.
But a perspectival property, that depends on the information that's available to the agent, the person having the response.
Okay.
Like if a question is interesting, well, that might depend on whether the person asking it has good reason to think they don't already know the answer.
So for something like blameworthiness, the FA theorist would probably use an objective normative property of responses because someone can be blameworthy even if no one knows they did wrong.
Hmm.
But for curiosity, they might go with a perspectival one, looking at what the person asking the question knows.
Exactly. And the SC makes clear that this doesn't necessarily mean the theory becomes all messy and inconsistent. FA theorists can still try to explain objective properties in terms of perspectival ones, or the other way around, to get a more unified account.
Okay, so the last choice point our source talks about is buck passing. That's a cool name. What's the idea behind it?
Yeah, it's a catchy one. Buck passing is a specific type of FA theory, and it's really focused on this concept of value simpliciter, just plain value.
Right.
And the most famous person pushing this idea is T.M. Scanlon. He argues that saying something is valuable is basically saying it has other properties that give us reasons to act in certain ways towards it. So the bug of normativity, the thing that makes the reasons, is passed from the value itself to the underlying properties that make the thing valuable.
Okay, I think I'm following. So the value isn't like the original source of our reasons to respond. It's more like the underlying qualities are creating those reasons, and we then call whatever has those qualities valuable.
Exactly, you got it.
Huh.
Scanlon's account has this negative thesis, which says that the property of being valuable doesn't actually by itself provide a reason to value the thing. It's like a higher level property that just tells us there are other, more basic characteristics that are giving us reasons. And then there's a positive thesis, which fits with the broader FA framework. It says that whenever something is valuable, it's because there are reasons to have a positive attitude towards it.
But the ESSA points out that this negative thesis, it's not like a must-have for all FA theories.
Right. It's not set in stone. You could say that value is based on reasons to respond without saying that the value itself can't also be a reason. It's just maybe a secondary reason, one that doesn't add anything new beyond the reasons given by the underlying properties.
So whether you go with Scanlon's negative thesis is another decision point for FA theorists.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the core concepts, the different ways you can build an FA theory. Now let's talk about why these theories are so interesting to philosophers, like us.
Right.
What makes them so attractive?
Well, the SC gives us three main attractions. The first, and probably the biggest one, is their ability to explain the really strong connections between normative and evaluative properties. Remember how we said at the beginning it seems obvious that being valuable and being fitting to value just go together? Well, FA theories offer a clear and simple explanation. The evaluative fact is grounded in the normative fact.
Yeah, it's not just some random coincidence that these two things always seem to show up together. The FA theorists can actually explain why that is.
Yeah. And think about the connection between value and reasons, which, as you know, is something we philosophers love to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
If something's valuable in some way, let's say a painting is valuable because it's beautiful, then it makes sense to say that the beauty gives us a reason to value the painting, right?
Right.
An FA theory that explains value in terms of reasons for valuing just naturally accounts for this connection. The beauty is a reason to value the artwork because that's what makes it valuable in the first place.
And the SESSEEP reminds us that even FA theories that focus on fittingness can explain these reason-value connections by showing how fittingness and reasons themselves are related.
Exactly. For example, if reasons for a response are the things that actually contribute to the fittingness of that response, then the link becomes clear. And the SIPI also makes this comparison to what are called no-priority views, which say that evaluative facts and other normative facts are basically independent. Neither one can fully explain the other.
Okay.
So for someone who holds a no-priority view, these connections between value and reasons, they just are, they're brute facts. But FA theory offers a potential explanation, a way to tie things together.
Okay. But couldn't other theories, maybe ones that put value first, also explain these connections? Just flip the direction of the explanation,
Yeah, that's possible. The SP talks about object-focused primitivism, which argues that something is fitting to value because it is valuable. Now, that kind of view could explain why value and fittingness always show up together, but the SAPI raises this issue of parsimony. If we explain fitting admiration by admirability, fitting love by lovability, and so on, we end up with a ton of basic evaluative properties.
Okay.
But FA theory tries to explain all of these in terms of a smaller set of basic normative relations, like fittingness or reasons. So it gives us a simpler and less cluttered picture of reality, which is usually a good thing in philosophy.
Yeah, simpler is generally better, all other things being equal.
Right. And the SAPI also touches on response-focused primitivism, which tries to explain normative facts in terms of the value of having those responses. But the SAPI suggests that this approach might run into some problems. Is it always valuable to have a fitting response? Like, is it automatically good to be disgusted by something disgusting or to be bored by something boring? If not, then this approach might have trouble explaining why those responses are fitting in the first place.
Okay, so the second big attraction of ethic theories, according to this FE, is their ability to demystify value. How do they do that?
Well, one way is by addressing skepticism about value simpliciter. The worry that there's no such thing as something being just plain good, not good for something, or good as something, you know that view.
Yeah.
Thinkers like Geach, Foote, and Thompson, they've all argued that goodness is always good as or good for someone.
And if there's no such thing as value simpliciter, that would cause big problems for a lot of ethical theories that rely on that concept. Like classic consequentialism would have a real issue.
Exactly. But FA theorists have an answer. They can argue that value simpliciter can be understood in terms of normative facts about valuing responses. And since even the people who are skeptical of value simpliciter usually aren't skeptical about normative facts, this makes the idea of value simpliciter more understandable to them. It's like they're saying, okay, you might not believe in goodness as this thing floating around out there, but you probably understand what it means to value something or to have reasons to value it. We can build our understanding of goodness on that more familiar ground.
It's like saying, you don't think goodness is real in this big abstract way, but you get what it means to value something, to have reasons to value it. So we can start from there, build on that.
Precisely. And the SCP also mentions how FA theories can help us understand agent-relative consequentialism. That's the idea that what makes an outcome good can change depending on who you are, the agent's perspective.
Right.
Some critics think this idea of agent-relative value is just confusing, but FA theorists can try to explain it in terms of agent-relative reasons for preference or desire. That might make it make more sense.
So we see how a theory of value can support a whole ethical framework.
Yeah, exactly. It's all connected, Right. Now, the last attraction that the SP talks about is the potential for FA theories to give us this unifying framework for everything about value. We know there are tons of ways something can be good.
Yeah.
Instrumentally good, intrinsically good, good in some way, good overall. And FA theories offers a way to understand all these distinctions with the same basic concepts.
Oh,
right?
okay. So like how? How do they do that? By looking at different kinds of valuing responses or what we value.
Yeah, that's part of it. For instance, something could be non-instrumentally good if it makes sense to value it for its own sake. But it's instrumentally good if you value it for what it can get you, what it leads to.
Right.
Same with intrinsic and extrinsic goodness.
Yeah.
You could tie that to whether it's fitting to value something because of what it is in itself or because of its connections to other things. And the difference between being good in some way versus being good overall, well, that could be about whether there's a pro tanto reason, a reason that counts in favor but might be outweighed, versus a sufficient reason to value something.
So pro tanto is like a vote in favor, but not necessarily a winning vote.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
It's like having this master key that can unlock all the different types of goodness.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy. And
Right.
it goes beyond just goodness in general, right?
Right.
The SP says FA theories can also explain what makes a good toaster, for example, or what's good for someone. And they do this by linking those things back to fitting responses.
Exactly. And it gets even wider. FA theories also try to unify our understanding of all these specific evaluative properties, like being admirable, delightful, praiseworthy. And they do that by explaining them in terms of the fittingness of different kinds of responses.
Wow, so they're pretty ambitious.
They are. The most ambitious FA theorists might even say that all evaluative properties have this same basic structure underneath. They can all be explained in terms of some normative property of a specific kind of human response.
Okay, so we've seen how powerful and unifying FA theories can be, but I'm sure there's some big challenges too.
Yeah.
What are some of the big outstanding problems that FA theory faces right now?
Yeah, even though FA theories are really compelling, they're not perfect.
Right.
And the OK focuses on 4 key issues. The first one, and probably the most talked about, is the wrong kind of reason problem, or WKR problem for short.
Wrong kind of reason, huh? That does sound like a problem. What is it, like, at its core?
Well, it's basically this intuition that there can be reasons to value something that don't actually make that thing valuable.
Okay.
The classic example, and a lot of people trace this back to CRISP, is this idea of an evil demon who threatens to hurt you really badly unless you start valuing some random thing, like a cup of mud, for example.
A cup of mud.
Yeah, a cup of mud. Now, the demon's threat, it definitely seems like a reason to value the mud, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who wants to get hurt by a demon? But do we really think that a cup of mud suddenly becomes valuable just because of that threat? I don't think so. It feels wrong. The reason to value the mud here is the wrong kind.
Right. The reason to value it has nothing to do with the mud being good in any way. It's just about avoiding something bad.
Exactly. And this WKR problem, it's not just about value simpliciter. The SCP points out you can make up similar scenarios for other evaluative properties. The demon could threaten you unless you admire someone awful or hate someone good. It works the same way. And it's not just about reasons either. It also comes up for FA theories that use other concepts like ought or should. The demon could make it so you should value the mud, but that doesn't mean the mud is actually valuable.
So how have FA theorists tried to deal with this? It's a pretty big issue.
Yeah, it is. So SC lays out 2 main strategies.
Yeah.
The first one is WKR skepticism, which basically says that these wrong kind considerations aren't really reasons to have that specific attitude.
Okay.
People who think this way might say that the demon's threat gives you a reason to want to value the mud or to try to make yourself value it, but not a real reason to actually value it.
I don't know about that. It sure feels like the demon's threat is a reason to do what he says, and that includes valuing the mud. At least, pretending to.
Yeah, a lot of philosophers feel that way.
Right.
The SFP says this skeptical response can be hard to swallow. It really seems like the demon's threat gives you a reason to go along with him. And saying it's just a reason to want to value the mud doesn't quite capture how we feel about the situation. WKR skeptics have tried to back up their position, sometimes using what's called a response condition on reasons. The idea is you only have a reason to do something or to feel a certain way if you can do it for that reason.
Okay.
But as the SF points out, this condition might conflict with some reasons that FA theorists themselves rely on, so it gets a bit tricky.
Okay, so that's one strategy. What's the other way to deal with this problem?
The second approach says that, yeah, WKR is the reasons, but we need to figure out a way to tell the right kind from the wrong kind. And then we can change FA theories so they only talk about the right kind of reasons. The hard part, of course, is defining the right kind without just saying they're the ones that make something valuable.
Yeah.
Because that would be circular.
Right. How can you say what's a right kind reason without already assuming you know what value is?
Exactly. It's a tough nut to crack. The essay mentions some attempts to do this. One early idea was the object-state-given theory, which said that RKRs are about the object of the attitude, while WKRs are about the mental state itself.
Okay.
But that doesn't really work, because there can be WKRs that are about the object, like the demon's threat with the mud, and maybe even RKRs that are about the mental state. Another attempt is the alethic view, which tries to connect right-kind reasons to whether your attitude accurately reflects the object. But that has problems too. It might depend on some controversial ideas about how attitudes represent things, and it could end up being circular if we say those attitudes represent evaluative properties.
So it sounds like defining RKRs in a way that isn't circular has been pretty hard for FA theorists.
It really has. And because of these difficulties, some theorists have gone back to the basics of FA theory and said that the difference between RKRs and WKRs should be explained in terms of fittingness itself. They say that RKRs are the things that contribute to the fittingness of an attitude, while WKRs don't. So an FA theory of value simpliciter would say that value is based on how fitting it is to have a valuing response, not just on the reasons for that response.
Okay, so maybe that gets around the demon problem. Even if the demon gives me a reason to value the mud, it doesn't make valuing the mud fitting, something that the mud deserves.
That's the argument. People who support this view say that while WKRs might give you reasons, or even make it so you should have certain attitudes, they don't make those attitudes fitting. The object itself doesn't become worthy of that response. This approach has become pretty popular as a potential solution to the WKR problem.
Okay.
But the SAP also mentions that some philosophers still have issues with this idea of fittingness. They ask whether we really understand it well enough before we get into the theory, and whether it might just boil down to reasons of a specific kind.
So the WKR problem is one big challenge. What's the next outstanding issue that FA theory has to face?
Okay, the next one is the wrong kind of value problem,
Okay.
or the WKV problem.
Right, okay.
This one comes from the idea that some things might be valuable, even if no one is around to appreciate or value them.
So value can exist even if there's no one to value it. How does that create a problem for FA theory?
Well, the SAP uses this example based on Bikefist. Imagine a world full of happy egrets, but there are no creatures in this world who can value things. No one in the past, present, or future. Just these happy egrets. Now, it seems like their happiness is valuable, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
But if there are no valuers in this world, then it can't be fitting to have a valuing response to their happiness.
Yeah.
It's not something we have a reason to do or should do.
Right.
So the value of the egret's happiness isn't based on any normative fact about a valuing response in that world.
Okay.
And this challenges the core idea of FA theory.
Yeah, it gets right to the heart of the idea that value is tied to our fitting responses.
Exactly. And then Reisner has this other example. It's a scenario where valuing something actually makes it lose its value. Imagine an object that's valuable if no one in a certain world values it. But if anyone does value it, it instantly becomes bad. In that case, it couldn't be fitting to value that object, because if you did, you'd make it bad. It's like a catch-22.
It really is. Valuing it destroys the value it's supposed to be responding to. That's tough for FA theory.
Definitely. And FA theorists have tried to respond to this. One common strategy is to say that even if no one in that specific world should have a valuing response, it is fitting for beings in other possible worlds, like us, to value the happy egrets or the object that loses value when valued.
So the value is still connected to a fitting response, but not one that has to happen in the same world where the value exists.
Yeah, that's the idea. But Reisner has criticisms of this kind of response.
Oh, okay.
Another approach the SEP mentions is to frame FA theory counterfactually.
Okay.
So something is valuable if valuing it would be called for if there were valuers around. This might work for the happy egrets case, but it's not clear if it can handle Reisner's more complicated scenario.
So the WKV problem really makes us think about the limits of FA theory.
It does. And the SF highlights two key differences between the WKV problem and the WKR problem. First, the WKV problem seems to apply no matter which normative property the FA theory uses. Fittingness or reasons, it doesn't matter. And second, while the WKR problem seems to affect a lot of different evaluative properties, the WKV problem might be more focused on value simpliciter. It's kind of hard to imagine something being shameful in a world with no concept of shame, even though we can picture something being good in a world with no valuers.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Maybe some evaluative properties are more closely tied to responses than others.
Right, maybe. All right, moving on to the third big issue, the problem of partiality.
Okay.
What is that, and how does it challenge FA theory?
Well, this problem mainly comes up when we're